Welcome to Real Scoop Live, a show for pool chemistry enthusiasts where we talk about all the coolest chemistry stuff you never knew you wanted to know. Any chemical advice or suggestions are opinion and utilized at the discretion of each individual pool operator. With that out of the way, let's start the show.
You walk along that street, talking nervously. You closer, won't be long now. You made me write this song, yeah. You say but don't know how.
Well, let's get the first mistake out of the way now.
Well, that was it.
There it is.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Scoop Live. This is Season 2, Episode 2, and today's program is Shock is a Verb. I am going to let the guys, Matt and Brett, tell you what the heck does that mean. So, guys, what the heck does that mean?
That's not what we talked about. I have no idea what you mean by that. No, I'm just
It seems like it means a lot.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, for so often, people say, well, shock your pool, right? Shock your pool. And so there's actually the vernacular in the industry is that shock is something that you add. But I mean, that might be true to marketing companies and certain different products. But really what it is, it's a product that actually shocks your pool or oxidizes your pool. So we've said that, you know, in the industry that shock means to shock, you know, it's a shock product, but shocking in actuality is not a noun, it's a verb. You're acting upon your pool, you're oxidizing or shocking your pool. And so it's kind of started as a verb, it's gone into the noun, but it actually is a verb because there's lots of different ways that you can shock a lot of different products that you can to make a shock or to oxidize your pool. So I hope that makes sense.
A lot of different ways to achieve the goal of shocking the pool.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And so for so long, I mean, we're talking about, 100 years or since the beginning of pools in general, we've actually done chlorine with a chlorine kicker. And that's something that we all say in APIs, chlorine with a chlorine kicker. And essentially what that means is that you're using chlorine as a sanitizer, and then when there's a problem, what do? You add more chlorine. So it's chlorine, and then we have a problem, it's more chlorine, so chlorine with a chlorine kicker. Well, that's not necessarily the way that you have to do it anymore. For the past 20, 25 years, there's been products available, like Easy Pool, that do an oxidation, the oxidizing as the verb oxidizing without adding more chlorine. So if chlorine is something that you're worried about, either because there are shortages in certain parts of the country, it's a lot more expensive than it was before, than it's ever been, and it just keeps getting more expensive. Or if you're worried about the health and safety of your pool, your kids, or the environment around the pool, well then, there's probably something that you should think about, that instead of doing chlorine with a chlorine kicker, you need to come into the 21st century and say, well, maybe it's better to have a little bit of chlorine, but then add some other products that get to the same result, but without adding a whole bunch of chlorine, with all the cons to using that. So Brett, shock and oxidizing is kind of something that you can go back and forth with. It's
used interchangeably a lot.
It's interchangeably, but what in the world does that mean for someone who doesn't know?
So in general, when you're shocking, you're generally trying to oxidize. That's a fancy word of saying breaking down contaminants that are in the water. The contaminants can either be caused by the use of chlorine, so chloramines, you can actually oxidize to break those down, or it can just be natural stuff that gets in the pool that you don't want in there and it needs to be broken down to get removed. Dead algae, bacteria, viruses. If they're dead and inactive from the chlorine actually being a good sanitizer, the bodies are still floating around, so you're going to oxidize and break them down so that they're not just cluttering up your water, making your chemicals less reactive, slowing down efficiency of a lot of the different programs and things that you use, because it's better to have a clean slate in your water rather than be cluttered up with all sorts of junk in there. So oxidize, chlorine is a sanitizer and an oxidizer. Just because it can do both doesn't mean it's the best option for both. So what kind of came to light the last couple of years is people realize that they don't have to bludgeon their pool with chlorine. that was kind of out of necessity because they couldn't get the crazy amounts of chlorine that they usually did over the last couple of years. You can finesse other certain problems, and a neat way to finesse a problem is to use other oxidizers, so like non-chlorine shocks. In certain instances, like UV or ozone systems can be used as well to help break down the contaminant load and not have to do that with obscene amounts of chlorine, because you do have other side effects when you're using chlorine. It doesn't matter what kind of chlorine you're using, liquid, granular, cal hypo, dichlor, what have you, they're going to impact other things that are going into your water. If you're using liquid, you're getting a boatload of salt. If you're using trichlor, you're getting cyanuric acid. Your pH is also going way down, and that it depends on what flavor chlorine you're using, the type of side effects you're going to have to deal with. So if you can reduce the negatives of chlorine use and actually use something else that helps with that, it makes it a lot easier, and ultimately you're not just beating your pool up with chlorine.
Right. Okay. So when you oxidize, just put it in context, think about a rusty car, right? Basically what oxidization does, it changes one state of matter into another state of matter. So in this instance, like what Brett was saying, is that you have these inner heebie-jeebies, or the contaminants that have now combined with chlorine that you want to turn into gas, so that way you're not swimming around in them. And that's the whole point. So if you're going to do something like that using chlorine, in order to change those contaminants into gas, you have to reach a point that is lovingly called breakpoint chlorination. And so breakpoint chlorination is very important, because until you reach breakpoint chlorination, all that stuff just hangs out in there. So in order to reach that, what you do is you test your water, you test free chlorine and then total chlorine, and whatever the difference is how much of those contaminants that you have in there, the ones that have been combined with chlorine. So total chlorine is a measurement of all the chlorine in the water, or all the oxidizers and sanitizers in the water. Free chlorine is a measurement of chlorine that is free to do what it needs to, which is to kill those contaminants. And the difference is the chlorine that has been used up. And that's what we're talking about. The chlorine that has been used up is the stuff that smells, it's toxic, it causes swimmer's lung, all the other stuff that with long time exposure, but all the other stuff that you don't really like about chlorine. So think about it like when you mop a locker room, you smell that very strong smell of chlorine. That is part of a chloramine. That's the smell that you smell. That's not good. So when you go into a hotel and you smell something like that and you go, oh, well, they have a pool, that doesn't mean that you want to go jump in that pool. That means that pool's not been properly taken care of. It's either that or they don't have a good enough air handler in there to get that out of there. Okay.
The automatic doors to your hotel open up and you can tell immediately that there's a pool.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to.
You shouldn't be able. Right. That's a bad sign.
A safe pool is a non-smelly pool, right? So that's kind of the thing to think about. So anyway, let's talk about breakpoint chlorination. I was saying that you have total chlorine and free chlorine, which are the two things that you can test with in your typical test kits or test strips. If there's a difference between the two, you need to know what that difference is. And in order to reach breakpoint chlorination, you have to put enough chlorine in there to get 10 times higher than that difference. So in other words, if you have total chlorine at 5 and you have free chlorine at 3, the difference of 5 minus 3 is 2. 2
that
times
checks
10. Out. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Fact check, right? Volume 2. What you have to do is you have to do 10 times that difference. So in this instance, we're talking about 2 parts per million. So you have to get 10 times higher than that. So 2 times 10 is 20. So now what you have to do is figure out how you can put enough chlorine in the water to reach 20 parts per million. And that's how you reach breakpoint chlorination. You have to get to 20 parts per million. But here's the thing. That's easy to figure out. But you don't know what your contaminant load is. You know what your cyanuric acid is, but if your cyanuric acid is above 55 or 60, it actually becomes detrimental to the effectiveness of the chlorine. If your pH is too high, that becomes detrimental to the effectiveness of the chlorine. If your pH is too low, that becomes detrimental to the effectiveness of the chlorine. So now you have...
There's a lot of caveats.
It's a very much amount of caveats, because you can look at it like, okay, in a laboratory, if you have distilled water that has that has combined chlorine in it, you know for a fact that 1 gallon of liquid chlorine or 1 pound of cal hypo is going to add 10 parts per million to 10,000 gallons. I know this is a lot of numbers, but you can rewind and follow that again. So 1 pound or 1 gallon is 10 parts per million and 10,000 gallons. So in a 20,000 gallon pool where you need to reach 20 parts per million, you need 2 pounds or 2 gallons, right? And that needs to be all at the same time, and the water needs to be balanced. You have to make sure you don't have a contaminant load, that cyanuric acid is under 60, all the other stuff. So if by chance you're one of the many pools that has a cyanuric acid above 60, the higher it goes, the more chlorine you need. So in essence, if you think you're going to get away with 2 parts per million and reach breakpoint chlorination, well, that might be good. But if you miscalculate for some reason because you don't know all these other things, that means that your chlorine might get to 19 parts per million instead of 20 parts per million. And if that happens, you did not reach breakpoint chlorination, but all the chlorine that you put in there now added to the combined chlorine total. So if you don't hit it the first time, the next time is not going to be 2 pounds. It's likely to be 4 or 5 or 6 pounds at a time.
And if you do that multiple times,
at a time,
25 pounds.
yes, it gets worse and worse and worse. So in that aspect, just like we talked about in the last episode, where more is not necessarily better, when you're shocking to reach breakpoint chlorination, more is better, because you don't want to miss that, because it just makes it worse. It makes it more time, more frustration, more money, all the other stuff that goes along with it.
With breakpoint chlorination, not enough is catastrophic, because you're just making the problem that much more worse, and you've got to add that much more product to resolve the issue that you had.
Okay, so that's the case, right? That is scientific fact. So how do you get around that? Well, you can use non-chlorine shock, right? There's products out there, especially the ones that don't have inert ingredients, or they're not blended, they're not mixed with other stuff that really doesn't do anything for you. Stuff like OxySplash. When OxySplash goes into the water, or even products like Easy Pool, Pepper, or even non-chlorine shock, when you put that in there, essentially you're breaking down that combined chlorine without having to reach breakpoint chlorination. So it becomes a point of, well, how much OxySplash do I need? Well, the great thing is that you can put it in and then wait 6 hours or one turn in the pool, and then put it in again, and then wait 6 hours and let the pool turn and put it again. So every time you can get that combined chlorine lower and lower and lower if you don't hit it the first time.
It can be incremental improvements if you don't add enough. It's not going to double.
It's not detrimental at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which is very important, because when you're dealing with contaminants and combined chlorine, you need to get something in there that's going to affect that, so that way the water doesn't smell and doesn't get toxic and doesn't make kids smell like chlorine when they get out of the pool, and all the other stuff that goes along with it. Products like OxySplash, the persulfate style stuff is your answer to that. Now, that's unlike other products, because I had mentioned before that when you're trying to reach breakpoint chlorination, the best chance of getting to that is using things like cal hypo or liquid chlorine, and both of those are non-stabilized. They go into the water, they crank up the chlorine, as long as everything is everything considered. They try to crank up the chlorine to get to that breakpoint chlorination. Then the UV rays from the sun burn it back off, and it comes back down. Now, those products have certain issues with them. Like Brett was saying earlier, it can change your water chemistry. It can leave residue. Calcium hypochlorite leaves calcium in the water. Sodium hypochlorite leaves salt in the water. But then there's other products that are sold as a noun shock instead of a verb shock, like dichlor, right? And it's not that we're totally against dichlor, but when you're trying to affect a pool to reach breakpoint chlorination, dichlor is really the least efficient of all of the noun shocks. Okay, Brett, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and just in short, dichlor works best if you're using it as your source of regular chlorine, introducing regular chlorine in there.
Like a boost?
Kind of like a boost.
Yeah.
you don't ever really want to shock with dichlor because it's got so much cyanuric acid or stabilizer built in that you're adding so much so that the amount that you're shocking almost gets negated by the addition of extra cyanuric acid as it's going in, meaning you're going to have to add a boatload more to accomplish the same thing that you could accomplish using a non-stabilized chlorine. On top of that, stabilizer doesn't go away, so that level is only getting higher as time goes on. It's ridiculously inefficient, and it makes me sad. So please don't use dichlor as a shock.
Don't make Brett sad.
Don't make me sad.
And forgive me if I'm wrong, but there's two things about this too. Number one, cyanuric acid doesn't go away if it's the proper cyanuric acid, right? That's number one. And that will be on another episode that we talk about. So if you having issues with cyanuric acid, please,
you're not alone.
You're not alone. We're going to talk about it in another episode of RSL this season, so just stay tuned. But number two, if I remember right, because remember I'm getting old now, right? I don't look at. No, I am. I do look at. But anyway,
Stacey, I think he was waiting for us to say no. You don't.
No. I wasn't.
Did we miss the mark?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. No, my son tells me I'm old all the time, so I don't need anybody else to tell me I'm not. So essentially, if you're looking at a pound of dichlor will give you 2 parts per million in 6,000 gallons of water, where cal hypo will give you 1 pound of cal hypo in 10,000 gallons gives you 10 parts per million. The other part of it is that 6,000 gallons with that 2 parts per million, it's stabilized, so it stays in there for a longer period of time, which is fine. But if you're trying to reach breakpoint chlorination, back to that example that we had before, if you want to reach 20 parts per million, you're going to have to put in 10 bags of dichlor for 6,000 gallons. So if it's a 20,000 gallon pool, again, like the example, then that means you're going to have 30, 32, or 34 pounds of dichlor at one shot in order to reach breakpoint chlorination. And no one should do that, right? Because the residue for sodium dichloro is cyanuric acid and salt. So you
said what? 32 1-pound bags of dichlor?
I think right around there. I mean, I was kind of doing it in my head, so it's between 32 and 34.
Which would be more than 10 pounds of cyanuric acid that you're adding to the water just with that one shock.
Right.
Then that builds up fast.
And the thing is that all the people that you're dealing with, or I'm not going to say all, a vast majority of the pool owners that you're dealing with as a pool industry professional are going to have cyanuric acid that is already too high. So it's best to avoid things with cyanuric acid in them. So if you can use a product that has no cyanuric acid, like cal hypo liquid chlorine, or one that doesn't even have chlorine, based on what the homeowner or the pool owner wants, you can say, well, use a product like OxySplash, use a product like OxyClear, use a product like OxySheen, that kind of thing, because that has no cyanuric acid and it doesn't add to the chlorine levels. Now, there is one time when you need to use a chlorinated product to shock. And what time is that?
It's about 1:45.
What?
No, it's when you're actively trying to kill things in the water.
Like algae.
Like algae.
Right. Non-chlorine shocks are much more efficient at getting rid of contaminants and combined chlorine than chlorinated products are. But when it comes to algae-fied pools, see, that's a little scientific lingo there. Algae-fied pools, non-chlorine shock won't help at all. It won't do anything for algae.
Algification process is...
Yes. Yeah. So if you have an algicide or an algified pool, not algicide, algified, then you're going to want to use a chlorinated shock. And when you do that, we at API and most of the rest of the whole industry is going to say use liquid chlorine or use cal hypo, right? That's much more efficient. Believe it or not, using liquid chlorine or cal hypo is much more efficient than using an algicide even. So using that stuff has a great effect on algae. So if you have an algae, use that. If you don't have algae, you just need to shock because you have a difference in the total and the free, or because the water just doesn't look that good, or maybe it smells a little, use a non-chlorine shock. All right?
And we're going to have an explosive ending here because it's going to be...
just wait for it. Wait till the end, as they say on Reels and TikTok. Wait till the end.
It's going to be controversial. The button on your chlorinator, it says boost, right?
No, on your salt chlorine, on your chlorine generator, not on your chlorinator.
Yeah, on your salt.
Chlorine,
well,
on your chlorine generator.
We're not generating salt, are we? Stay tuned for that one. But the button on your salt cell says boost, right? It doesn't say shock. It's because the boost button does not shock your pool.
Yes.
Close the episode before anyone can comment. Bye! We'll talk more about that later.
Right. So actually, we're right on time. But if we want, we can talk just a little bit about that. Or would you?
Let's do it.
Okay. So when we do chemical seminars quite frequently. One of the PowerPoint slides that we have up there, just for reference, has the pros and cons of chlorine generators, right? So that in itself is controversial because so many pool owners that you deal with are going to say, well, no, it's a salt generator. No, it doesn't generate salt. It generates chlorine. It's a chlorine generator, right? It's electrolytic chlorine generator, an ECG. So anyway, on these things, there's pros and cons. The pro is that an ECG makes 1.5 pounds of chlorine in a day at 100%, running for 24 hours at full strength pump. Well, one of the cons is that it makes 1.5 pounds of chlorine in a day for 24 hours at a full strength pump.
But Matt,
So
how can it be both?
how can it be both? Well, if you need 1.5 pounds in a day, at one time, in order to shock a pool, you're not going to get that because it takes 24 hours to make that.
And that keep in mind, your pool's still up and running. More stuff's getting in there. More contaminants are getting in there. The chlorine that's being produced is getting used up almost as fast as it's going in there. It's not shocking anything. So the boost button is essentially the stress out your ECG cell button because it's working harder and ultimately not accomplishing what you're trying to do. So it's costing you more in the long run because you're stressing the salt cell out, meaning you're going to have to replace it sooner, when it would have been just as easy to add a gallon or two of non-chlorine shock and accomplish the goal you're trying to over the course of a whole day in about a minute and a half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got really animated.
Yes. And we can go into that later about the different strengths of the different shocks and what that means when it comes to how much chlorine you're adding, right? But 1.5 pounds in a day, but it takes 24 hours to get there.
Yep.
So you can essentially put in two bags of cow hypo to achieve the exact same thing within, like Brett said, within about 2 minutes. So that 70, 73, 75, 78%, 2 bags of that equals the amount of chlorine that a chlorine generator can create in a day.
Boom.
Boom. So there's also one last thing.
Here it comes.
Look, this isn't a sales thing. Okay, we're here just to talk about chemistry and chemicals. But I will tell you that in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, the amount of pepper that's been sold into the marketplace, pepper is a salt pool or a chlorine generating pool's best friend, because you can put this stuff in and it makes it so you don't have to hit the boost button. You don't have to worry about cleaning the cell. You don't have to worry about the sodium hydroxide being made when you're making hypochlorous acid, which raises the pH. All that stuff you don't have to worry about. So there's no adding cow hypo. There's no adding scale causing issues. There's no any of that stuff. So pepper works great for that. So if you do have a salt generator, or as we know as a chlorine generator, then pepper is really your best friend. So I'll just leave it with that. Okay.
All right.
Hey.
That's a wrap.
All right.
Okay. Pen drop.
What'd you drop?
A pen.
Okay.
I use an orange pen.
Oh, very good.
All right. So remember, like, subscribe, share, and make sure to see us the next time we have episode 3, which will be the magic pill.
And let us know if you have topics you want us to cover. A lot of these came from you guys.
Yep. Sure did. We love it. As you can tell, we're all really excited. We're all chemical geeks, except for maybe Stacey, but she's a geek. She's one of us. She's
catching the fever.
Yeah. It's rubbing off on me.
That's right.
The number to call or text is running across the bottom of your screen right now. So if you have ideas for future episodes or you have questions about anything that we talked about today, that's how you can reach us.
All right. Thank you so much. See you on the next episode.
Bye.
Now I can't wait for summertime. It won't be long when you come back. I love you like I do. Love you like I